Hi, I'm CP, welcome to Bespoke Unit, and in this video I'm reviewing the Drew Estate Liga Privada number 9. As per usual, this review is conducted using the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, a quantifiable review matrix. If you're in a hurry and you don't want to watch the whole video, simply look in the description and go to the final written review. Well, you'll see a full PDF version of this, which will give you a breakdown of the cigar and its characteristics. Furthermore, these cigars were stored using the Boveda acrylic humidor that you see beside me here. It is stored with 69% Boveda packs for a period of 3 weeks to ensure that it has been properly acclimated and prepared for review. The Liga Privada project first started in 2006 when Drew Estate president Steve Saka wanted a blend that he would smoke. Indeed, Drew Estate until then was best known for flavoured smokes such as the acid range. The project was very intense and lasted over a year. In 2007, an initial version of the number 9 was first released, and then it became sort of a boutique blend that was released on several occasions till it finally became part of the full lineup in 2011. Nevertheless, it has retained the sort of handwritten style of band, which we'll talk about later, and the number 9 is a reference to it being the 9th blend that was tested. I've been particularly looking forward to reviewing the Liga Privada number 9 and a little bit apprehensive as well, and the reason is that it is one of Paul Anthony, the founder of Bespoke Units, favourite cigars for specific occasions, of course, such as a late evening. He'll often have these for a nightcap, so I hope I won't be letting him down with my evaluation. Now, with that being said, let's talk about the cigar's profile. So it is made at La Gran Fabrica Drew Estate in Esteli. It is made with an accordion-style rolling technique, so it is hetero mano, it's made by hand. Its wrapper is a Connecticut Broadleaf number 1 dark. The binder is a plantation-grown Brazilian Mata Fina, and the filler consists of Honduran and Nicaraguan tobaccos. With that being said, now let's jump into the look and feel of the cigar. And as you can see, I have a Bellicoso 6x52 cigar in my hand. It's already been cut, but here hiding behind the Boveda acrylic humidor, I have an uncut version here for reference, as well as a Flying Pig. Now, the Flying Pig is a gordito shape. It has a wide girth, very large ring gauge, but is quite short. Don't be fooled, this isn't necessarily going to be a much shorter smoke than the Bellicoso. Given that it's wide ring gauge, if you're familiar with nubs, they tend to smoke for quite a while if you smoke them slowly. However, if you smoke them quickly, they'll burn hot, but they will be quite short in comparison. I would recommend a full-body cigar like this, you take your time. Therefore, the Flying Pig is a little bit deceptive. Anyway, jumping into the look and feel, and in both cases on these cigars, they have a very straight roll. It's quite impressive. There are no discernible soft spots. The spring is quite firm, occasionally bordering on the slightly soft side, but still quite well packed. In terms of hue, you're looking at here aged mahogany. And in terms of the oily sheen, it does deliver quite an oily sheen on there. I've heard people refer to the Liga Privada as somewhat dry in appearance, but I don't think that to be the case at all. In fact, I think it's remarkably oily. As for the veins, though, they're quite rustic, shall we say. There are some pronounced veins on the wrapper, but that really, I would say, if anything, adds to its overall charm. In terms of aromas on the body and on the foot, I've noted here some tonka bean, some quite acidic cedar, but cedar nonetheless, and some moist earth. That being said, although I'll be talking about the cigar being quite full-bodied and full in flavour later, the aromas on the nose are quite subdued. Anyway, moving on to the Prelight, and here, as you can see, I've already cut the cigar, and the draw is ideal, and one thing I love about a Bellicoso is that you can adjust the cut according to the draw that you want. So if you want something a bit tighter, you cut just the end off. Otherwise, you can go a bit further down, but of course not past the cap. The flavours, though, aren't that rich on the dry draw. You do get some tonka bean again, chocolate, some dark chocolate, as well as olibanum or myrrh, which has a slight vanilla essence. I suppose the next thing for it now is that I light this cigar. Well, I'm about a third of the way through, and I'll tell you what, that smoke output is very impressive. Similarly, the body on this cigar is already quite strong. The flavors are a little bit more subdued. They're not as pronounced, but the body is definitely there. I imagine the body is going to increase as I progress, and to be honest, I know it's going to increase as I progress because this isn't the first Liga Privada number 9 I smoked. Nevertheless, it's still quite manageable right now, even for the inexperienced. In terms of burn first, the draw is ideal. Just a slight draw and you get an immense amount of smoke on your palate, swirling it around and then letting out through a retrohale. It is a very pleasant experience. The angle is a little bit uneven. As you can see, this side really wants to come down. I've already touched it up here, and I normally don't touch up doing videos, but I wanted to here because it looked like it was really starting to become a bit wonky, but it's still quite wonky despite my efforts. The temperature is quite cool. The ash backbone, as you can see, is very good, and if you want to see what this cigar can do, head to the written review in the link below, where you'll see I managed to smoke once an entire cigar of the Liga Privada number 9 with Paul Anthony, and I had an entire ash on it. It was crazy, a little bit impractical, and I don't know if Steve Saka would have approved, but I had a good time doing that. And then in terms of the flavors, so the most overt flavor we get is fresh walnuts. You could also say Brazil nut because there's a slight hint of bitterness, but I'd be more inclined to say fresh walnut. There's also a hint of cacao nib, so it's not really dark chocolate, although there is a hint of sweetness. You're more on the cacao nib edge of things without the strong bitterness, because like I said, there's a hint of bitterness in this cigar, but it is not overt. And then there's a little bit of a sweet cedar wood as well, just underneath, which gives you a little bit of contrast against these more gourmet notes that come alongside it. Interestingly, I believe it was Nick Melillo who was the blender for this cigar, or at least heavily involved in the blending process, who now owns and runs Foundation Cigars, and Paul and I had the pleasure of meeting in Nicaragua in early 2020. So here we are in the second third. I'm at the halfway point of the cigar, and there has been an increase in body. In terms of flavor, the transition has been a little less evident, much more subtle and subdued. There are perhaps different notes, but it could be very easy just to say that they were exactly the same as the first third without there being much argument. Nevertheless, I would argue that there has been some changes. First of all, the walnuts, although arguably still there to a certain extent, are much woodier in character, and I'd be more inclined to liken them to rosewood, for example, which is somewhat fragrant. Meanwhile, the cacao nib is going to be closer to dark chocolate. It's much thicker in texture and does have a little bit more sweetness. Meanwhile, the cedar has pretty much gone, and instead we have black pepper. As for the burn, it has improved overall. I haven't touched this up actually, it did manage to correct itself. The draw is consistent, perfectly fine. I did lose the ash, and there was an interesting burning issue when I de-ashed, but this has corrected itself as well. And the temperature remains quite cool. Right, final third, here we are. So the final third does have a noticeable transition. In where the first and second third, it wasn't quite as distinctive, the final third comes with a wallop. Indeed, the body increases significantly, as does the flavor profile. On this occasion, we're greeted by some leather, a hint of espresso, as well as the black pepper from the second third that persists throughout the whole cigar. I haven't, as you can see, I'm not quite at the nub yet. Although I have smoked a couple of these, I can say that the flavor is consistent. This is quite a nubbable cigar that you can enjoy all the way to the end if you have the stomach for it. Indeed, I would not recommend that you smoke this cigar on an empty stomach, and if you're a beginner, it perhaps isn't one of the first cigars that you would want to smoke either, given that it is quite full in body. The complexity of the overall cigar isn't quite as nuanced as you may expect. I have heard that when it was first released, the tobaccos that were used were at their prime, and with aging, they started to dwindle a little bit. But according to Nick Melillo himself, give it a couple more years in terms of aging, and you're going to have a bit of a roller coaster effect, and the cigars will increase in quality and in their complexity as well. Nevertheless, the mouthfeel is very smooth, very pleasant and velvety, leaving a thin texture on the palate. As for the astringents, it's very balanced, slight salivation at the back of the palate, but it is indeed very pleasant indeed. And the stimulation as well overall is very balanced across the whole palate. You're not going to have any areas where there's too much concentration of flavor. Meanwhile, the life cycle, although the second third does kind of chug along, it does have a decent evolution in flavor. You will see some development as you smoke. And the finish is quite long. You do get a lingering flavor on the palate. And if you enjoy having a palate cleanser after a cigar, I would highly recommend this with an espresso. Otherwise, the residual scent in the room, as I said earlier, I've been smoking this with the windows and the doors closed. I've used an air purifier sparingly, not when I've been filming, obviously, because you don't want to hear that. And it's actually quite pleasant. For a full-bodied cigar like this, I was kind of dreading it, thinking I'm going to stink out the whole house, but it is it does leave a nice fragrance in the room. This leads me on to the burn, and although I've discussed the burn throughout the cigar, I'm going to do a quick summary. The draw is ideal throughout the whole cigar. It is quite consistent. The temperature remains cool even when you're right down to the nub. The angle, there have been some wavy moments on this cigar, but I can assure you that on other cigars that I have smoked, it has been perfectly straight and in fact quite impressive in terms of construction. And the backbone tends to be on the stronger side. This cigar, the ash did plop off a couple of times, but as you can see, it has retained its shape even though it fell on the floor. So then I can assure you that it does offer great performance in that aspect. If you like to produce large stacks or put the cigar on its head after you've finished smoking it, this is something that you can do with this cigar. This leads me on to the overall experience. Now, in terms of the band, it may not be to everyone's palate, but I quite enjoy this more artisanal back door or back shop effect that they've continued with since it was first released back in 2007. The box has a very similar effect, although it does have a hint of luxury inside it with, for example, the Flying Pig has several dividers and things like that. The value of the cigar is an interesting question. You're looking at $15 RRP for a single stick. That is in the case of the Bellicoso. You'll probably get it at about $14.75 per stick if you buy a whole box of 24. There is a lot of debate of whether it's worth it or not. I believe that this is a wonderful cigar. It's quite unique, so it does provide you value in that sense. And it might be something you want to hold on to, although Steve Saka himself said that it's going to be a 3-year lifespan in terms of aging, and it's not going to be one that benefits from it. From what I understood from what Nick Melillo said, it could benefit from additional aging after that and long-term aging. So really, this is kind of a cigar that if you want for a special occasion, and that leads me onto the occasion, it's probably one to keep hold of or even enjoy at an earlier moment. Otherwise, the versatility of this cigar in terms of occasions isn't that diverse. For example, if you were to take a cigar with a band like this to a formal event or an exclusive club, it may I personally wouldn't be put off for it, but you may be concerned that it might not be quite fitting with the setting. Nevertheless, it's something that I would certainly recommend for a special occasion among friends, or indeed, if you're catching up with a long-lost buddy, this is a good cigar to go for. And especially after what we've been going through with all the lockdowns, this would probably be a great one to crack out. And finally, we're going to talk about the pairings. Pairings is not something that is scored. It is just a thought exercise that we have at the bottom right-hand side of every cigar formula, and we discuss in the written review in the link below. First of all, food-wise, now this is if you're going to have them during or before, and then the cigar would be in itself more of a digestif, is entirely up to you. But I would highly recommend roasted chestnuts, especially with the first third. You've got the cow nib and the walnut. Roasted chestnuts would add this nice element of gourmand note that would extend those flavors quite well in the cigar. Otherwise, you could certainly consider dark chocolate, given the cacao nib, as I mentioned, and the dark chocolate in the second third. That would pair well too. If you want to extend the sweetness and add a little bit of contrast to the cigar, something like caramelized peanuts would go well, or as the French call them, chouchou. That would be an excellent choice, and I would highly recommend it. As for beverages, I have had this with Paul with Anello rum. I believe the rum we had was a Zapaka. Otherwise, I would consider things Spanish style definitely, or you could go for an English style Jamaican rum that would go quite well. You want something with a good level of body that would compare well with the cigar. Otherwise, the cigar has a tendency to kind of squash or stifle any flavors that you get from your beverage. Likewise, consider a bold cognac, maybe a fine champagne, but I would probably refrain from Scotch whiskey that will have flavors that may clash. That being said, some Highland malts would go quite well with this, but otherwise a bourbon or an Irish whiskey may be a little bit too floral and too light. And finally, in terms of coffee, an espresso would be an excellent choice. Given that this is a long smoke, perhaps opt for a double espresso. And if you're fond of ristretto, which would be an excellent pairing indeed, those are sadly a little bit too short to enjoy with a cigar like this. Nevertheless, something from, for example, Twin Engine, which is quite full-bodied in flavor, would be an excellent pairing indeed. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give us a like, give us a subscribe for more videos like this, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions about the Liga Privada number 9 or any cigars that you'd like us to cover in future. Until the next one, why don't you head to bespokeunit.com and you'll see all the other men's lifestyle subjects that we cover. I'm sure that there'll be something else that you'll love.